Well, on last night's show, we briefly brought you a story that was just breaking in the Daily Telegraph about new transgender guidance for children as young as 4 in Scottish schools. It would allow primary school kids to change their name and gender without their parents' knowledge or consent. A 70-page document sent to schools says it's possible to come out as transgender at any age. I tweeted about it last night, produced hundreds of replies from people on both sides of the border, the vast majority expressing mystification that this could be happening. Typical these responses, David Sands, who wrote, "Most Scots will be appalled by this. It demonstrates clearly how out of touch SNP ministers are with real people." Robbie Cross, "There are very good reasons why parents' consent is required, the main one being for child protection purposes, take away a parent's knowledge of what their children are experiencing, and who knows what could occur." And the SNP's Education Secretary denies the guidance promotes transitioning, describing it as practical advice which respects the rights of pupils. Let's turn to Richard Lucas, who is the leader of the Scottish Family Party. He joins us live from Edinburgh. Richard, thanks for your time today. What was the first you heard of this when it appeared in the papers last night?
Well, to be honest, the content of it is actually nothing new. But these principles have been underpinning the approach in Scottish schools for many a long year now. It tends not to come to the surface. It doesn't become a mainstream media controversy. It doesn't become a mainstream political controversy. But this approach to transgenderism in schools, I say, is well and truly embedded, despite the fact that I'm convinced a substantial majority of parents would find it very concerning.
Why the democratic deficit then? This is a functioning democracy in Scotland. If people find this so objectionable, you just go to the polls and vote out the people proposing.
I take the mic back now. Yeah.
That's a brilliant question. Now, my take on that, when you look at an election campaign, the mainstream media coverage of it and the political debate during it, it always goes back to the same old questions. They talk about the NHS, independence, maybe the economy, if you're lucky, coronavirus. They'll just go back to the same old issues. Then as soon as the election is done, in the Scottish Parliament, the attention turns back to the key moral and social issues. So we've got assisted suicide back on the cards. That was completely off the table during the election campaign. And this, when the SNP know full well that they'd have put this, front and central in their manifesto, it would have been an electoral disaster for them. So they keep it under wraps during the election campaign. And as soon as the election's over, they're back into normal mode, promoting this hyper-progressive agenda.
It's one thing to call it a hyper-progressive agenda. Can we just drill down into what practically it might actually mean? In a primary school, if a child begins to exhibit behaviour, for instance, they start playing, it's a girl playing with boys, quote, boys' toys, then we are saying, aren't we, I believe, that the teacher might then say, actually, we're going to medicalise this problem. It's not just a phase you're going through. We're going to set you down a route that could ultimately lead to some transitioning. Is that really what we're saying here?
But to be fair to the guidance does make it clear that non-traditional gender behaviour is not to be interpreted as transgenderism or gender dysphoria. The guidance is clear on that, so we need to be fair about that. But it presents the message that transgenderism is, changing gender is normal, natural, healthy. In fact, it's something that's good. It's something to be celebrated. It recommends posters to be put up in schools that celebrate transgenderism. So that's the context. So it's presenting young people, right from primary school, with this message that this really is something they should be considering their own gender identity. And if young people, children, do decide to express that, actually, I think I'm a boy, I think I'm a girl, when they aren't really, then the instruction is that just has to be accepted and affirmed. The guidance explicitly says, if someone were to say, that might just be a phase, you can't say that. That's detrimental to their well-being. But the message is basically, if you do anything apart from say, that's wonderful, what would you like me to call you? Would you like a new name? What pronouns would you like? If you don't take that approach, then you're really endangering that young person to the point that they might well commit suicide. It really is polarizing the discussion to that extent.
And the family written out of that conversation as well. I remember conversations about this 20 years ago, the idea, for instance, of a 15 or a 16-year-old going to the GP and going on the pill, let's not tell the parents, this is between you and me, the GP. That's one thing. People, I suppose, to some degree, got their heads around that. This feels different. The children are younger. It, in a sense, has effects which are potentially much more far-reaching.
Yeah. Remember the named person scheme in Scotland, state overreach into family life? People often think that's gone away. It hasn't. I mean, it's still ongoing. That's still talked about in this guidance. They're always talking about children's rights, by which they mean the right of children to overrule and to exclude their parents from the decision-making process. But the attitude embodied in this guidance is that the only correct approach, the only way of looking after children is to affirm and encourage them in the transgender, in changing gender decisions. And any parents or families that don't go along with that, they're very definitely treated as a danger and a problem that the child needs to be protected from. In some parts of the guidance, it's very clearly giving the message that if a family doesn't accept, support, in other words, endorse a child's decision to change gender, then it really needs to be considered whether that family is a place where the child ought to be. And it really does go to that length.
Wow.
But basically, the guidance is written by transgender activists with no balancing influence at all, as far as I can see.
Richard Lucas, appreciate your time, if not necessarily a message. Thanks very much.
All right, thanks very much.
Welcome back. It's time for The Clash, and it's a huge topic. The Telegraph newspaper have reported that children as young as 4 will be able to change their name and gender at school without their parents' consent under new LGBT inclusivity guidelines drawn up by the Scottish Government. A 70-page document issued to schools in Scotland yesterday calls on teachers not to question pupils if they say that they want to transition to live as a boy or a girl, and instead to ask them for their new name and their new pronouns. I'm not sure I knew any pronouns when I was 4, but the guidance claims that it's possible to come out as transgender at any age, and that the views of young people should be respected if they do not want their parents to be informed. Scotland schools have also been told that trans pupils should be able to use whatever lavatory or changing room that they choose, to develop gender-neutral uniform options, and to include transgender characters and role models in reading material and lessons. LGBT advocacy groups such as Stonewall have helped draw up the guidance and welcome the move, and claim the rules will help all children to thrive. To debate this now, broadly supporting the move is my fantastic panellist on the show this evening, journalist and broadcaster Sam Dowler. And against is Richard Lucas, leader of the Scottish Family Party, who joins me live from Scotland's capital of Edinburgh. Gents, brilliant to have you on the show. If I could start with you, Richard, why are you concerned about this ruling?
2 aspects. One is that it presents to children the idea that changing gender is a normal, natural and healthy choice. And then having encouraged children down that road, it then excludes parents from the process.
Well, I guess it could be a lovely moment in someone's life to transition, Richard, in the way that a gay person comes out. But I don't know whether that's your concern or whether it's the timeline. It's the fact that very small children will be making this choice. Is that your concern, the young age of the students involved?
I think it's particularly concerning for the young age, but I think my concerns go across the age range. I think changing gender is not a normal, natural and healthy decision. I think it's a path that's very difficult for young people because of the mental health outcomes related to it, etc. It's a very difficult road to go down, and it's not something that should be presented as something, as celebrated as an option for young people to take. It's basically a response to a mental health problem, gender identity disorder, but they're turning it into something at the behest of LGBT activists. It's Richard, presented as entirely positive.
Richard, would you take the view that it's a disorder for adults as well? Do you think that across the board, wishing to transition is a mental health issue? Is that what you're saying?
I think it's a symptom of a mental health issue. Yes, which means it should be treated the same as any other mental health issue, with compassion, with appropriate treatment and support, very definitely. But the concept of founding your identity on a delusion isn't an effective life strategy, in my view, and in the view of many parents, which is why they don't want this view pushing on their children in schools.
Sam Dowler.
So what we need to remember here that this is guidelines. It's as soon as you mention the trans word, everybody's up in arms and wants to have an opinion about it. This is guidance for children as young as 4. No, children as young as 4 don't talk about pronouns. They don't care about things like that. Of course they don't. So this isn't about forcing an agenda onto people and telling them that it's oh yeah, is that what you'd like, etc. It's about providing extra support for the literally infinitesimal amount of children who would even be take any notice of it at all. So I think if there's any kind of guideline that actually looks after children more, I don't see how anyone, especially somebody from the family party, would want to deny them.
Richard?
Well, the question is what amounts to looking after. I'm suggesting that this guidance for young people is not conducive to their long-term well-being. I think it's dangerous to them. In terms of age, from 8 years upwards, the Scottish curriculum teaches young people about gender identity and about transgenderism. And it's presented, as I say, as a normal, natural and healthy option. You say it's a tiny number of young people that are affected. It's a tiny but rapidly growing number. I was talking to someone who works in a school in Edinburgh just the other week. They were saying, barely a week goes by without the staff getting an email that there's another student who's transitioning or changed their pronouns or changing their name. So it's a substantial number and rapidly increasing number of pupils.
Well, Sam, a part of this idea from the Scottish Government is to develop gender-neutral uniform and include transgender characters and role models in reading material and lessons. So I'm wondering whether it could go from a tiny, tiny proportion of pupils to many, based upon the fact that it's effectively on the curriculum.
Well, you can't force somebody and say, oh, like, isn't this a good idea? Don't you want to be transgender? And there's also, gender is a massive spectrum from non-binary to you don't have to have these strict guidelines. All they're saying, for example, with schools and with uniforms, like you can wear skirts and trousers. Girls can wear trousers now if they want to, and they should be able to. If you don't want to wear a specific item of clothing, then you shouldn't have to. Surely that's just looking after the pupils, surely.
But Sam, would it be confusing for a 5 or 6 year old to be read a story at primary school that says, well, you might be a boy, you might be a girl?
Well, I think you could have said the same thing about gay people 20, 30 years ago. My mother said she knew when I was 3. So that was obviously quite, she could have told me at the time. But the point is that by saying to a child, like, oh, it's just a phase, etc., children are so receptive to these kind of things. It's like not having 2 men kiss in front of children, when in fact children really don't care, and it's what the parents put onto the kids that is actually far more damaging. If it was all normalised, then there wouldn't be a problem.
Richard, what does this tell us about the culture wars?
Well, their approach is that there's the one true truth. And the mission of the government, the mission of schools, is to inculcate parents as ignorant amateurs if they have other views. It's as simple as that. But if you look at the explosion in the numbers of children experiencing gender identity problems in recent years, what else is it caused by if it's not caused by the prominence of transgenderism? But it's not just schools' fault, in the media, but also in schools. I mean, you mentioned a reading list there. I mean, if you read a book to young children about someone deciding if they're a boy or a girl, that obviously communicates to the children, this is a decision you have to make. There's also a book on the reading list for senior school that includes a story of a 6-year-old having oral sex with adult men and reporting that they enjoy it. And I've made videos about that. Other people have raised concerns about that book, and yet that book is still on the reading list, published by the Scottish Government. It's called Beyond Magenta. You get hold of it or look on YouTube, you'll see videos about it. That's what it contains. That's what the Scottish Government wants in schools.
And is this an SNP idea, or does it come from Scottish education as an institution?
They're the same thing. It's what I call the blob. It's Scottish educational establishment, it's the political establishment, it's the media establishment, it's the social work world, it's all the sock puppet charities that the Scottish Government funds. So this huge array of organisations, all of the same mind, pushing in this direction.
But at the heart of it, is it the SNP's ideology, or do you think it's just the view of the left in Scotland?
I'm not sure it's even the left. It's just the cosy consensus of the whole Scottish establishment. I mean, you need to experience it to believe it. The amount of uniformity of thought in Scotland.
Are you an Englishman, by the way, Richard?
I've lived in Scotland more than half of my life. I am originally from England, yeah.
I mean, do you see a difference between what's happening in English schools and what's happening north of the border in Scotland?
I think there is a difference. I think there's a lot of concerns about what's going on in English schools as well, along similar lines. But I think things are, on this sort of issue, things are always worse in Scotland. I mean, the SNP prides itself on making Scotland the most progressive country on the planet. And you can see they take that goal pretty seriously. And there's virtually no opposition to it. You would think the Conservative Party today would be making something of this and pushing back a bit, trying to represent a vast number of parents who are not concerned about it. But they're just feeble, weak.
Viewers, especially anybody that's a trans viewer watching this program, would be quite offended by your comments that anybody that's trans has a mental health issue that needs to be cured or treated. Many people, and perhaps Sam would take this view, that once you're an adult aged 18, 19, 20 years of age, it could be that you just feel that you're a woman in a man's body, or vice versa, in the same way that a man can discover that he's gay rather than heterosexual. What's the difference?
I think if someone is of the feeling that they're a different sex than they actually are, then I think that reflects some sort of mental health issue. It's a problem for the person. I've got every sympathy with that. I think they should be supported and helped, but it does indicate some sort of dysfunction within their psyche. And I think that's quite and that was the view of the medical and scientific establishment until they changed under political pressure.
Well, Sam, would you, actually, I'll come to Sam in a second, but just following up on that, Richard, would you take the same view about somebody that was gay?
No, I think that's different in lots of ways.
In how so?
Because with gender identity, we're looking at a belief that is clearly untrue. I mean, if a man believes...
So being gay is natural. Identifying as a woman in a man's body is not natural. Is that essentially your view?
A man believing that they're a woman, I think that belief is delusional. Again, I think it can seem very real for the person. It can be a very challenging issue for them to deal with. But ultimately, the fact is that it's based on a belief that isn't true. And so some people might think that maybe the best way forward is to accept that belief, or other people would think the best way forward is to try to reject and overcome that false belief.
I mean, I got to say, Richard, my view is live and let live. And if you're a grown adult, you're 18, 19 years of age, then, if you were born Richard, but you want to be, identified as Lorraine, I'll respect that. I, do know a lot of trans people, and I think they've found the journey to being the person that they are a very positive one. But Sam, what's your view?
Well, for starters, homosexuality was considered to be a mental disorder up until, I think it was maybe 30 years ago, as I said. And so I think in this case, obviously, we are talking about children, and how you said, Richard, about this explosion of kids looking into their genders. What would you say to them then? Just stop doing that. Stop exploring your gender identity. It's wrong.
Is it not, Sam, being fed by woke teachers with an agenda,
what would be the woke
gender ideology?
This is the thing. No one's trying to create a transgender army of people. All they're doing is they're informing kids that it's okay to feel certain way.
I think Richard would argue that's exactly what's been created, as a transgender army. Yeah. In the NHS, in the civil service, and now in schools.
Yeah, the question's a good one though. Well, what would I say to people in that situation? Well, I think, as I say, you're dealing with people who are vulnerable in a sense, who are facing a real serious issue in their life. And even if we take the most modest view, and the Scottish guidance says the response has to be, okay, that's great, we affirm that. What would you like us to call you? Do you want to change your name? We'll say you're a boy or a girl from now on. That's what you have to do. Surely there's another valid approach where you could say, okay, that's the way you're feeling at the moment. Maybe taking the step of coming out as a different gender, maybe that's not the best thing at this point. Maybe this is something where we best leave this for a little while, see how you feel about it. And also just think about it in the longer term. How is this going to play out in the rest of your life? Are you sure this is a decision that you want to make, looking at the outcomes for transgender people? Now, what I've said there, I think that's perfectly reasonable, and a lot of parents would want to deliver that sort of message to their own children. But the Scottish government says if you do that, you're harming children, you're bad parents, you're bad teachers, and we just can't have that.
Sam, thank you, Richard. Sam, your sort of closing thoughts on this one. I'm really curious to know what you think, because the country is divided really on this trans issue, isn't it?
Well, as you said, Mark, you have trans friends. I have trans friends as well, and this is a hot button issue at the moment. It hasn't changed the amount of trans people there are in the country. It's a very small percentage. So there's a lot of people talking a lot of about something they don't really know about, and they don't know anyone who'd been through the trans experience themselves. So I think when it comes to supporting children, the point is that they need to be given extra support if that's how they're feeling, and it is such a small amount. I don't think there was any point in it's such an uproar every time this is mentioned.
Do you not think, Sam, that it's confusing for children, though? Because if there is a story that's, about a boy identifying as a girl or vice versa, and perhaps one of the pupils engages with that idea and changes their name and uses a different toilet, do you not think the other kids will think, well, blimey, what's my gender then? Do they really need to have that conversation at the age of 5 or 6?
Kids have stories about everything from fantasy to reality to everything. So I think at the end of the day, as I said, it's such a small amount of kids. So the teacher will be able to spot that one child is different, and that is how they're feeling. And this is all about basically identifying that person and making sure they're okay.
Fascinating conversation. My grateful thanks to both of you for participating in The Clash tonight. We heard from Richard Lucas, who is the leader of the Scottish Family Party.
Well, let's go to the GB News. We're covering that story so extensively. Quite a contrast to the other media outlets. For example, the Herald had a little report of it in the paper, so did the Scotsman. In their report, they had various people commenting on this guidance, but all the comments were positive. They just went around the usual sock puppet charities, government agencies, campaigning groups, etc., all completely for it. Then you look at the comments thread below it, like 90% saying this is total madness, what's going on, the world's going mad, how can this be allowed to happen, this is just utterly bizarre. A total disconnect between the writers of the newspaper and their audience, it appears, looking at the comments, in any case. Now, with these interviews, you never quite get the chance to say everything you want to say. One thing I would pick up on from that, and the second one, they were saying live and let live is our approach. And I was poised ready to say, well, how's that different from what I'm saying? If adults want to choose to live their life differently than I would recommend to them or advise them, then, that's fine. That's up to them. Live and let live. We're not talking about that here, though. We're talking about what children are encouraged towards, what's presented to children, and the way children are treated in school. I think it's a completely different issue. We also said in this, I said the Conservatives had been silent on it, which at the point we made these, I hadn't been aware of any comment from the Conservatives. But there was actually a tweet that came out from them, raising a concern about this guidance. But the concern was about parents being left out of the decision-making process. That's the Conservatives for you. Okay, that's a perfectly valid point. Parents should not be left out of these processes. But you see what the Conservatives won't talk about. They won't challenge the message of promoting transgenderism as a normal, natural and healthy choice for children and young people. That's the real issue. That's the really controversial one. That's the one where you say and you find yourself in hot water. You're called transphobic, etc. Now, the Conservatives won't touch that, but they will just nibble at the edge, as they normally do, and say, well, parents need to be involved. In other words, it seems like they're happy for young people to be presented with this dangerous message, for children to be encouraged down this destructive path, so long as parents are kept in the picture of what's going on along the way as well. Now, Murdo Fraser, Conservative MSP, he tweeted saying that the fact that the report the guidance used the term sex assigned at birth, that showed that the lunatic fringe had been very influential in its creation. Okay, that's quite harsh language, but okay, fair enough. Does Murdo Fraser realise that this sex assigned at birth, this philosophy, is taught to children in school, primary school and secondary school, just without question? So our generation has been educated to think
that way of seeing the world is the one true truth. That is the normal way to see things, this sort of radical gender ideology. Now, that is the fact. That is what a generation of young people and children have been taught at school. What does the Conservative Party have to say about that? Nothing at all. So if Murdo Fraser regards that philosophy as from the lunatic fringe, then I suggest he joins a party that opposes these what he calls lunatic views being taught to a whole generation through the education system. Okay, we'll leave that there for now. I'm actually going to make a long video about the whole report. The report is 7 pages long. It is full of all sorts of things that I'm sure you'll be fascinated to hear about and quite shocked by as well. So that video will be coming out in a day or two. But I thought I'd just share this GB News material in the meantime. Okay, thanks.